If you're listening to this, you might be a student of psychology or freshening up on your knowledge of or questions regarding interpersonal dynamics, human nature, personality theory, what have you. Someone might have told you that you might be an empath or that you might be a narcissist. And I believe there's an ongoing narrative about this sort of thing. And these two terms have been used as buzzwords a lot as of late. And for that reason, I encourage you to listen all the way to the end, because I do intend to provide you fully with the answer to this question that you're looking for. And I don't want you to be off-put by the disclaimer. Thank you. Enjoy. If an empath is so intuitive, how is it that the narcissist dupes them into staying? Well, guys, this is a question with a lot of layers to it. A human being, an individual, has a lot of different facets, and there could be more than one answer to this. I encourage you to look at your situation, as well as, if you feel inclined to, continue your research on this subject, but ultimately consulting a professional in psychology would be the best means for you to find information. I want to encourage you also, if you are looking at this empath, narcissist narrative as a means to explain a bad relationship, the best thing to do, in my opinion, is first to look within yourself, be introspective, and look at what you are getting out of it and what the other person was getting out of it, because it is, in some sense, mathematics, not to sound cold. But moving on. So there's a disclaimer here. Just because you are a victim of narcissistic abuse, it doesn't make you an empath. It might mean that you are kind and that you've put up with much more than you should have, or that you went against your own intuition and stayed in a situation longer than you should have. By claiming to be an empath, you might be trying to acknowledge or take back your intuition when maybe you kind of disregarded it, or perhaps were gaslit into thinking that it wasn't as strong as it was. And it's possible you're dealing with someone with narcissistic tendencies, or even that you have them as well. It's possible that both parties could have a little of both. If someone's a complete narcissist, they're a complete narcissist. If someone's a complete empath, they're a complete empath. But there's only a certain percentage of the population that are narcissistic, and I don't believe that being an empath is something that is diagnosed in psychology. So that's sort of more of a new age thing. But when you see this kind of thing in forums and online, mostly when people are self-described empaths, what they're doing is virtue signaling. By labeling themselves an empath and labeling their partner or ex-partner as a narcissist, they're attempting to influence other people's perception of them and their situation, as well as maybe their own perception. There's always a story. Everything is, has a storyline. There's stories people tell themselves, and people have characters and archetypes they assign to things and people and symbols, and so I would really encourage you to look at that. Okay, so if you are here watching this video because you're wondering, as a strongly intuitive person, even being told you are an empath puts you in a position to not really see what you need to, and that is that your part in this is ignoring your own intuition or allowing yourself to remain in a situation that you shouldn't for whatever reasons you had at the time. It is your responsibility now to look at your part in things and decide what you didn't like instead of studying narcissism and empaths. That being said, being an empath doesn't make you unhuman, and you may very well have been, as an actual empath with an awareness of someone else's feelings or lack thereof, stayed with them out of convenience's sake, or because they felt, because you felt you'd invested a lot. or out of guilt because they had invested a lot in you, or in some cases, there's coercion or intimidation out of finances or goods. There are also cases where two narcissists or where two people with narcissistic tendencies get together and they do all the things narcissists are known to do, as in having people around to stroke their egos, playing games with each other to see who comes out getting more. And since they are both afraid of emotional intimacy and extremely insecure, oftentimes the relationship is volatile and oftentimes they'll flirt in front of each other to keep the other party hanging on and maintain some sense of control from the outside in. Also, they will have sometimes like a as narcissists, they will also actively idolize or put on a pedestal, value, idealize, basically, and devalue each other as well as people around them. They're still going to play all of those games that keep them in their sort of egocentric place in the universe and on their pedestals that they need to be on, as well as their partners. Sometimes idealization is because they're a person that sees themselves from the outside in, as how other people view them, and they believe that their mate is a huge part of that, or sometimes because they truly believe that that is going to validate them, having a mate that's idealized. But other times that's a game that's played along with, what people call love bombing. Sometimes narcissists have other issues where they truly believe that something might work, but deep down there's a feeling that they're playing this game, as every man for himself. But anyways, moving on. To answer your question directly, no, most people in these relationships don't realize the absurdity and the hypocrisy of their self-proclaimed empath status. Don't get angry with me. But it is ego-driven to think that if you're seeing this person that is sort of almost childish in their need for validation, and that really anyone will do, that it's not a very mature, differentiating need. They're pretty much anyone who will feed into their fantasy view of themselves and their persona and stroke their really sort of falsified, barely held up ego will do. But a lot of people dupe themselves into believing that they're special and that they're going to, if they're codependent, they're going to fix this person. If you believe you're special to someone and they dupe you, that doesn't make you necessarily ego-driven for believing, in relationship values. But a lot of times, someone who thinks that they're an empath and they're with a narcissist, that's ego-driven. It's absurd and it is hypocritical, and that might be hard to hear, but this narrative is causing people to think they're special. Grandiosity isn't just believing that you're the best or the most successful or the brightest. It can also be believing that you're the most victimized, that no one's ever suffered as much as you. It can be like martyr status. And continuing on in that when you've already maybe realized that you're with someone who is not respecting you as you should, and then sort of boasting about it, is very much like grandiose martyrdom. But in the case of empaths, their grandiosity, like I said, is centered around their emotions. They believe that they have these special abilities, and that their emotional experiences are deeper, and that intuitively they're connected to most people, and that their emotions are more meaningful than other people's. That's also something notably that narcissists feel. Obviously that their emotions are more meaningful to them, but because oftentimes with NPD, they do feel strong emotions with regards to themselves and their circumstances, and might believe that they're kind, and every favor they do you is huge, because it is a lot to really, on an evolutionary level, to step out of that self-preservation mode, which they're kind of stuck in like a baby is. They do feel strong emotions with regards to themselves and their circumstances, and even more so if there are other personality traits or personality disorders intermixed. Remember that we're talking about generalizations, which are really absurd when we should be discussing individuals, because that is what all of this really pertains to, and any one person could have any mixture of traits. But empathy is both a feeling and an experience, depending on how the verbiage is used and in what context, but truly lacking in conjunction with a lack of knowledge or denial of one's own inner emotions, and often negative ones, often inner turmoil, with a grandiose ego and an idealized self that they're willing to lie to both themselves and others with regards to, is what really defines a narcissist. The narcissist is stuck in shallow waters, whilst the empath can often get stuck in deep ones and lose touch with the realities of the shallow ones, even as they affect the empath's circumstances and well-being. So one is focused on the deeper emotions, and one is sort of focused on the ego. They might not even believe the narcissist lies. They simply disregard the importance of them and get stuck in this sort of denial, because they believe that they're doing something to fix them, which is in many ways congruent, but also exactly opposite the narcissist denial. It's almost like looking in a mirror. It's like, or those pictures where the roots as above, so below, but opposite, like the tree roots and the tree branches, yin and yang, and it ebbs and flows with it in a symbiotic dance. This is where that kind of brain fog comes in, because they're constantly having to yes, and nod their head to stuff they know is wrong, instead of putting up with a fight or having, their living situation change. Sometimes there's a lot of sort of power dynamics or leverage dynamics going on here too, between both. Sometimes it's the person that's not narcissistic with all of the tangible sort of I want to say pawns, but yeah, like the tangible means to sort of change the other person's situation if they decided they wanted to punish or reward them. assets. But that's where, yeah, it's this brain fog, cognitive dissonance, for for an empath is a lot of times like trying to fix a car that isn't yours because you have some strange belief that it will help you or that you're going to be with this car forever, or just because it feels good to help. That's something. While those around you tell you that the car is just for display, that the engine will not work, even if it seems that way, and all the while someone is messing up the paint job on the outside of the car, so the more shallow parts of the car. You see this, but decide that you will fix it later, because it's really not relevant. The actual inside of the car is what you're working on. The deeper emotions is what this is a metaphor for. But meanwhile, the car is just getting worse, and so is your well-being, because you're investing your well-being into this. The paint job is getting worse, the engine isn't getting any better, and you are day in and day out going as far as to attach jumper cables, life force, to, emotions, investment, to an engine that just will not run. It has some kind of mechanism in it, self-imposed, rubber or something, that keeps currents from running through it and powering it up, and it willfully keeps that rubber in place. So whatever kind of emotional block, incapable of giving or feeling love because of a strong distrust from a very, very deep place. But still, the empath keeps trying to chip away at that. Anyways, but like I said, it's symbiotic. Both are parasitic in their own right if you consider that not all parasite-host relationships are bad. Some are mutually beneficial. Like vampiric, if you think of something that sucks out venom versus something that sucks out blood. The empath might also struggle with codependency, and so might the narcissist. Interpersonal dynamics are still there. For a lot of, these sort of buzzword diagnoses, which is really what they are, diagnoses. They shouldn't be thrown around as social labels, but alas, they are. And these kinds of links are often the hardest to get someone to face the reality of. Both are getting something out of it, even if it isn't in the emotional realm. We could be talking again about a living situation, or having no place else to go, or having some other extenuating circumstances which would make it scary or awkward or criticizable for you to leave. But that is why you need to look at your situation specifically if you are here looking for answers, in addition to whatever research, and often instead of whatever research you are doing on YouTube or other unqualified sources full of misinformation around some labels, like I said, that really have serious implication, as there are real-world diagnoses that someone has told you to place on you and your partner so that you can tell the story a certain way. It is too easy. And at the same time, if you look into it, it becomes complicated. It shouldn't be that way. It should become less complicated as you look into it, if it's true. It should be able to say it in a few words. For some, not in all cases, sometimes you really need to explain. But if you're being entirely honest with yourself, for some, this really is their reality. But if you find yourself having to justify stuff, it is either because you have truly been abused and feel the need to explain yourself constantly, as if you are doing wrong when you're not, or because there is something that truly doesn't line up and you are justifying it to yourself in order to fit a narrative that is incomplete and dogmatic. So empath, when someone describes themselves as an empath, they're describing the ability to discern what others are feeling, and it goes beyond empathy, which is defined simply as the ability to understand the feelings of others, and it extends to actually taking those feelings on, which is kind of different than codependency, because empaths claim to actually feel those feelings or get them kind of confused with their own. Feeling what another person is feeling at a deep emotional level. So really, really connecting, because they're just kind of like often trying to like disregard their own ego, sometimes actively. But the empath believes, often subconsciously, that they can heal and help the narcissist. So they, as sort of the general story goes, they're pouring themselves into showing the narcissist their worth, because they see that at the core of the narcissist is a lack of self-worth, but the narcissist will never see it. The narcissist in this position will take advantage of the empath and see their compassion as weakness because they're just focused on the material world. They are going to try to take and take as much as they can because they have this black hole, because they don't feel their own inherent worth, so they just take whatever they can. It's a constant hunger for validation, for money, for whatever they can get, because at some point a relationship isn't enough because they realize that you are you and that they are them, that you're still two different people. And so they need whatever you have because they don't have that feeling of being able to stand on their own 2 feet as far as the arena of worth. So, yeah. Empaths might know the truth in the beginning, and they might know it and continue to put up with, with lies and stuff, knowing that, maybe this person will mature, maybe this person will grow up. Occasionally that happens. But if they're a legit diagnosable narcissist, then no one person is going to be special to them, especially no one who is seeing them for them and acknowledging them for them and loving them because they view themselves as flawed. So they will view that person as stupid. Someone who's giving to them, who's seeing their worth because they don't see their worth. So especially if you're close to them, you're in too close to what they view as worthless. And if you're connected to that, then you're connected to that. Their worthlessness, they feel, rubs off on you. You eventually get burned out, and they need constantly to be the center of attention. So even focusing on yourself is something that could cause them to just kind of disregard you, or to look for other sources of, constant attention. So yeah, perhaps the narcissist is blinded by their own arrogance and shame and denial. And perhaps perhaps an empath is blinded by their own shame at putting up with something they know or suspect to be false from a logical perspective. That, or having appealed to their own ego and believing so wholeheartedly in the empath idea and their ability to heal that they thought they were the one that could do something for someone, not looking at healing. Cognitive dissonance. But you know what? The other thing, if you are in that position, like, you're embarrassed for being ego-driven, but you're with someone who's constantly ego-driven. But they're just directing that somewhere else. Instead of directing it at helping someone, they're directing it at being able to take. So don't be embarrassed. You're putting up with a lot. It doesn't mean you're stupid. A lot of times I think that people view empaths as being duped. Sometimes they just look past those things. They see them as irrelevant because they really are deep water. But if it's affecting your physical, concrete reality, you need to live in the present, pull yourself back from that, and free yourself. You're not important. It's not your job. It's not your responsibility. No one's important to them. They're important to them. Be important to you. You be important to you. Treat yourself like you treat them. But yeah, I think that it's important for me to stop here and say that if you really are, I'm not trying to be negative, if you really are someone who is trying to help a narcissist and really start in that situation. But cognitive dissonance or overall shutdown in some arenas of their interpersonal affairs and thoughts around it, maybe some form of semi-self-imposed and semi-partner-imposed isolation, as well as their own need or want to heal someone, or this someone in particular, and also themselves sharing in denial. Can cause, just a lot of furthering of self-doubt and just exhaustion and not wanting to deal with it. Also, a point that I want to make is, so another way you can think of it is, one, the empath, a legitimate empath is trying to heal the other person at their core. And the other person is essentially eating the frosting off of the cupcake and throwing out the baked part, the more hearty and nutritious part, as in accepting all of the compliments and attention to their ego and not allowing in any of the love because they can't or won't. So by the time the other person is worn out of compliments and begins to just tell the narcissist how it is, finally acknowledge reality, because a lot of times they're not being duped unless they really just can't see it, which oftentimes I think happens because they're getting something else out of it. A lot of times it can be sex, which they mistake. Sometimes some people mistake for love and connection. Some people invest a love and connection into sex, and they have to recover from that too. But so a lot of times by the other person, they're worn out of compliments. They begin to tell the narcissist how it is, or to be so worn out that they expect or need some kind of reciprocation, or at the very least have to isolate and recharge themselves, or to seek some kind of interpersonal warmth elsewhere. Then they are seen as less valuable to the narcissist because they have less to give them, or because their attention isn't primarily on the narcissist due to taking time for, a moment of self-preservation, which is that's the state the narcissist is in constantly, of just rabid hunger because they don't have any internal source, internal bank, internal reserves of self-validation. So if you consider that burnout to be the state the narcissist is always in, take that burnout and really apply it, because that's what they're doing constantly. But yeah, they're cutting back, at least from their outpouring of healing and stuff. Sometimes it's just two people, one kind of more laid back and putting up with more than they probably should at times because of being more mature, and then it gets to the point that they're drained and they realize the folly in putting up with things for so long, all along, but they kind of want to work things out because they see who the person can be, but their belief in themselves to be some kind of magical force in someone's life has turned against them in a way because it left them devoid of energy for themselves. And they both need to focus on themselves, need to be sort of emotionally independent, but neither, for whatever reason in that situation, is being that way. With true narcissism is the focus on the self, but like the namesake in Greek mythology, it's all about the physical reflection and not the actual fundamental self that is vital for survival, like the life force. And unlike the myth, it is not them and the mirror that they're sitting with, or the reflection. It's not self-sustaining. It's not like they're sitting there just loving themselves. It's not self-love. It's love of the ideal self, the false self. The condition at its core requires other people to feed the ego and to constantly validate and sort of ensure them that that false self is real, because otherwise they'd have to sit with, their feelings of inadequacy and everything underneath. The id feels inadequate based on something that trickles down to the subconscious and the subconscious beliefs that feel too shameful to admit. And therefore, that false persona is built and remains, and that's who they believe they are. So they just feel empty and just completely not there without constant validation and money and shiny things. It might not be money, but it could be any number of things. Sex, but they're addicted to the hard stuff. Anything that isn't tangible that they can feel super strongly. They want a lot of times to, play social games. They want a high, like, what do people call it? Body count, number of partners. That's common too. The empath sees through that, but their own ego is a pitfall because they believe their healing powers or their understanding of this person to be so strong that they'll be able to somehow storm the castle and not get bit by the dragon. And then they do, and eventually they realize that that's not what they want to do. They realize they're getting sucked into unhealthy games. There's other people, they often call them flying monkeys, which are people that feed into the narcissist's sense of self-importance, or the narcissist has something leveraged in their lives, has something that they want or need, or they're just really insecure themselves or their fellow narcissists, and they'll do the narcissist bidding or lie for the narcissist, or they'll see, oftentimes they just won't want to get involved. They'll see it as too mixed up. They'll see people lying to themselves, lying to each other, and they'll see a person who is remaining in a situation that they shouldn't. They don't know, if you are an empath or if you are a person in a relationship with a narcissist, uh, how much of the truth you know, how much of the truth you don't, how much of the truth you can handle, even if you know it. Maybe you don't want to talk about it. Maybe you're in denial of it. And they'll play those games with the narcissist because they're they're functioning as if they're extroverted, and very social. And a lot of times, they figure out how to leverage things, how to play games. Sometimes they want people to fear them. So they'll gain control by whatever means necessary. And, uh, like any person trying to gain control who might not even be a narcissist, some people start smear campaigns, that just wanting to ruin someone. Sometimes people have issues with their relationship, with feeling like because someone expects monogamy or something, that they're somehow trying to control them. Usually they're projecting some sort of thing from childhood, or from a previous relationship. There's all sorts of things that could go on. But basically my point is, I don't believe that the empath is usually duped. But I do think that there are people that feed into stuff longer than they should, and instead of admitting that, they will be quick to label themselves as empaths. And that's kind of where this whole narrative has been brought on. Thank you.